Everyone. In this module, I'm gonna discuss about the general pathology. So basically, in pathology, it can be divided into a general pathology, systemic pathology, and hematology. So this is the first video of the general pathology, which I will be discussing about the cell injury and how the cell adapt, what are the manifestation of the cell injury, the hyperplasia and atrophy, and metaplasia. So first I will be explaining about how the cell adapt when the cell is suffered with an injury. So when a cell is suffered with an injury, what are the organelles involved? So here you can see the nucleus. This is the mitochondria. This is the endoplasmic reticulum and the plasma membrane. So these are all involved when a cell is injured. Now coming on to certain facts, that is, which is the most common cause of the cell injury. So when the cell is in hypoxia, that is the most common cause of the cell injury. And what is the most common cause of this hypoxia? So reduced blood perfusion, that is ischemia. So this is the most common cause of hypoxia. The tissues are undergoing hypoxia. So which are the cells that are most sensitive to hypoxia? They are neurons. They are very sensitive to hypoxia and they can't survive without oxygen. And which are the cells that are least sensitive to hypoxia? So they are the fibroblast, even the skeletal muscles. So this skeletal muscles, they are least sensitive to hypoxia. So now what are the other causes of a cell injury? So the cell can be injured by certain physical agents such as the heat, cold, radiations. It can all involve this. It can all cause the cell injury. Then certain chemical agents such as the drugs, certain infectious agents such as the bacteria, virus, certain genetic defects, it can also cause cell injury, and certain immunological agents. When we are talking about the autoimmune attack, so they also can cause cell injury, and certain nutritional problems, that is, either there is deficiency or there is excess. So if there is deficiency, for example, the protein energy malnutrition, the kwashiorkor, and if there is excess, for example, obesity. So these all factors will also cause cell injury. So when a cell is getting injured, it will try to adapt because it is an unfavorable condition and the stimulus is a noxious stimulus, that is, it is unfavorable. So the cell will try to adapt initially. So the cell will adapt by different mechanisms, either by hypertrophy or by hyperplasia or the cell will adapt by metaplasia or it leads to atrophy. So if that stimulus is continuing, that is, the cell will get injured. So the first type of injury is the reversible cell injury. So why it is called reversible? That means if that stimulus is withdrawn, the cell will become normal. That is why it is called as reversible cell injury. But still, if the stimulus is continuing, the cell will undergo an irreversible cell injury. So when this condition has reached, so when we are taking the stimulus off, the cell won't become normal. That's why it is called the irreversible cell injury. So during a cell injury, it also can undergo intracellular accumulation of certain the proteins, lipids, glycogen. It can these substances can accumulate inside the cells, and this cell injury will also lead to the pathological calcification. So this irreversible cell injury, it will result in cell death. So the cell death can be by various mechanisms. That is, it can undergo necrosis, it can undergo apoptosis. These cells can undergo necrotosis, they can undergo pyrotosis, and even ferrotosis. So these will be explained in the coming module. So overall, I am going to explain about this in the coming module. So now, what is this hypertrophy? So here you can see the cell, it is increasing its size. So the cell is, there is increase in cell size, but there is no increase in the number of cells, no increase in number of cells. So this is hypertrophy. So when the cell size increases, it will lead to increase in the size of organ. Okay. So what is the mechanism behind it? So how the cell size is increased? It is by the synthesis of certain proteins by the cells. So synthesis of such proteins is the reason behind the increase in cell size. So which are the elements in our body which is undergoing hypertrophy? So they are permanent or non-dividing cells such as neurons and the skeletal muscles. So the neurons and the skeletal muscles, they can divide, so they will undergo hypertrophy. So now what are the examples of this hypertrophy? So the hypertrophy can be physiological or it can be pathological. So the physiological, you can see in this skeletal muscle. So when you are doing the exercise, your skeletal muscle is getting hypertrophied, and this is reversible. That if a person stops doing exercise, that can be become normal. So another example where the physiological hypertrophy is seen is the uterus. especially uterus during pregnancy. So, another condition is the breast, that is a mammary gland seen during lactation. The breast during lactation, it undergoes hypertrophy. So, the pathological condition. So, during hypertension or during, if there is valvular heart disease. So, during hypertension and valvular heart disease, so there is left ventricle going into hypertrophy, so resulting in left ventricular hypertrophy. Now, what is hyperplasia? So the hyperplasia, it is basically, as you can see, it is increase in the number of cells, thereby the organ size increases. Whereas in the hypertrophy, we have seen that the cell number is not getting increased, the cell size is getting increased. In this, we can see the cell number is getting increased. This is happening mainly in the dividing cells. It is quite logical that in dividing cells, the cell will adapt by hyperplasia. So, what is the mechanism behind it? The mechanism is the certain growth factor. It will induce the proliferation of cells. This growth factor will induce the proliferation of cells.